So hello and welcome to this online peace conference. I'm very honored and proud to tell you that this is the second such event organized by Maximilian Laktisch from the Department of Global Governance at the University of Graz, and me, Joseph Mühlbauer from the Varna Institute for Peace Research. And I'm delighted that you all found the time today to join this conference. Before I hand over the microphone to our keynote speaker, Professor Oliver Richmond, let me thank Hannah Stadler and Max for the great effort in organizing and preparing this event. Let me also thank David Scheuing for the great support that we received by the scientific journal for peace studies called Wissenschaft und Frieden. And also I want to thank the Conflict, Peace and Democracy Cluster, the Austrian Center for Peace, and last but not least, the Center for Southern European Studies for supporting this event. And like I said before, this event will be recorded and published on the YouTube channel of the Varna Institute for Peace Research. Let me explain what is VIPR. The Varna Peace Institute is basically a platform for progressive ideas and a YouTube channel that promotes peace and stands for an egalitarian and just society. It heavily depends on volunteer work, crowdfunding, and subscribers. Therefore, feel free to support us by subscribing. And now I will give David the opportunity to introduce yourself and please tell us about the scientific journal Wissenschaft und Frieden.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Welcome, good morning, good day to everyone from whichever end of the world you're tuning into this. My name is David Scheuing. I'm the editor-in-chief of the small journal that you might see pop up behind me, called Wissenschaft und Frieden, so science and peace or research and peace. A journal that has been trying to connect peace research, peace movements, and the politics of peace over the span of the last 40 years. So it is the child of the German sort of integration of peace research and peace movement 40 years ago, and it's actually our 40th anniversary this year. So I'm really, really happy that we've been invited to co-host this event with such an amazing panel of speakers today, since it's also part of our sort of catapulting into the 21st century, since it's actually just the second online event that we've ever done from the journal. Nonetheless, I'm really, really thrilled that we're diving into the question of local peace building and the question of local peace here today, since I think what the journal has tried to do in the last 40 years is always to bring new theoretical and empirical breakthroughs and findings to a wider audience. But I think what has been missing in the last few years is like a really in-depth translation of the challenge of liberal peace and the question and the sort of seeking for the question for local peace building. And I think it is actually crucial that we sort of translate this to a wider audience, not only to politicians, but also to the wider sort of general public. And I think the journal has always been trying to do this. Nonetheless, I think we need to strive and find new formats to bring this about. So I'm really happy that we sort of mix and blend together different formats now. Let me make one literal remark, because I think what is also very crucial about us being together here today is that the question and the sort of idea of localized peace building is always met with some sort of skepticism, and it's partly sort of because of a general sort of unknowingness about what this project and sort of like the emancipatory dimensions of it might be, and on the other hand, because people also sort of refer back to the international structures that we see, and sort of like in all that we understand that sort of localized dimensions is very necessary. The critique would be that not all peace can be and will be negotiated locally. So there is racialized structures, there is continued coloniality, and there is the overarching structural crisis of the planetary crises. So in that sense, not all can and will be negotiated locally. And I'm really, really thrilled that we have all these great insights from different sort of case studies here today, so that we can also find and see where the debate takes us on these questions of how we will find like the idea of a more localized peace in a more sort of in-depth connected way. So yeah, without further ado, I'm handing back to Joseph. I'm really, really happy that we're here. And yeah, thanks to all of you on the panel for providing us with your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for the introduction, and thank you for the important remarks. Without further ado, I will hand over to Max, who will show you the schedule and the program for today.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph. Thanks to all of you for coming. We are quite a good number, so many participants. Thanks all of you for coming. And yeah, it's the second of these kind of conferences, and it got kind of a new relevance, this topic. So I think that it is in these times where state-led warfare seemed to be the only means of peace, partially, that we want to focus and emphasize on the relevance of the local peace in our conference. And we are really, really happy and honored that Oliver Richmond agreed to come to us and speak about the local peace. So Oliver is one of the pioneers of the local peace, who has also contributed to what was called the local turn in peace building. And we didn't want to only have and talk about academic issues and theory. So we also had the idea of giving voice to local actors. So all too often, even if we do criticize the liberal peace or state centrism, we kind of we still are in danger to become slightly essentialist, at some points universalist, and thereby might appropriate maybe local voices. So this is why we invited people from conflict areas and people who are basically peace practitioners, who work for NGOs and who engage a lot with conflict for the purpose of peace. So this is our attempt to try to give those actors that we deem crucial for peace a voice. So what is our schedule? So in 4 minutes, Oliver is scheduled to introduce us to the local peace, to what he called local peace formation. So that's also the title of our conference. We scheduled 15 minutes for Q&As. So if you have any kind of question, please raise your voice or write into the chat, and we'll try not to overlook any contributions in the chat. So this will be until 12 Central European time. Then Edmund Yakani from CEPO, an NGO in South Sudan, will speak to us about his work, about his impression about the cruciality of the local peace and his experiences with working together with state actors or actors at the international stage. So this will be moderated by Eva Huber from the Austrian Center for Peace. This will be a 20 minutes presentation by Edmund Yakani, and then 10 minutes for Q&As. At 12:30 then, Amina Kravovac from an NGO from Bosnia, from the War Childhood Museum, will speak to us about her peace work. Again, this will be 20 minutes presentation, 10 minutes Q&As from 12:30 to 1 p.m. Central time again. And then from 1 to 1:30, we'll have Vera Maula of Piece of Art, a Lebanese NGO, speaking to us about her wonderful NGO and the work that she does. What I forgot, the presentation by Amina about Bosnia will be moderated by Amina Galias from the Center for Southeastern European Studies from our University of Graz here. The next part by Vera Maula will be moderated by me. I think Joseph already mentioned it. I work for the Department of Global Governance at the Institute of the Foundations of Law at the University of Graz. So, and this was already too long, so I'll directly hand over back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, now I want to shortly introduce to you Oliver Richmond. And then I hand over to you, Max. And then we can move on to our first panel about South Sudan. So Oliver Richmond is a leading scholar in the field of international relations and peace and conflict studies. He's a professor at the University of Manchester. In 2019, he received an Eminent Scholar Award from the International Studies Association. He has worked with international actors, especially the UN and civil society organizations in several conflict-affected areas around the world. And he has also conducted fieldwork on local, state, and international problems of peace building. Yeah, not only in Timor-Leste, Sri Lanka, Cyprus, Bosnia, and Kosovo, and Colombia. Without further ado, I hand over to you, Oliver. Let's dig deeper into your work. And I'm very glad and honored that you found the time and that you followed our invitation. And let's introduce your theories and concepts, and please tell us about your latest findings.
Oh, thank you, Yusuf and Max and David and all of you also for being here to listen to me briefly. So I'll just take about 20 minutes or so, I think. That's as per my instructions. So I'm going to launch right in. I, of course, am Western trained and had experience, even before I started doing research in this area, on the limitations and problematic nature of Western style attempts to do peacekeeping and mediation and diplomacy and these sorts of things. In some of it firsthand in Northern Ireland and Cyprus and so on. And when I started to work on it, of course, as a scholar, I was directed by other scholars and my supervisors and all the rest of it to focus on the sort of knowledge nexus that had emerged in the field of conflict studies, conflict research, peace research, these intersecting fields that came from different areas, mainly of the global north, US, Scandinavian, British and European academia, Australian too, I think at that point. And they, in this time-honored kind of Western rationality or epistemological framework, directs me to work through concepts like peacekeeping and mediation and all of these sorts of things. And I had begun to wonder why that sort of top-down, rather elitist, state-centric, or multilateral style, international law style epistemological package was being used for thinking about peace and conflict, when if you were on the ground talking to the subjects of insecurity in conflict-affected societies, they would often, one, be able to render very distinct and succinct analyses of what had caused their conflict and what might be done about it in both linguistic but also epistemological ways which made sense to them and were rather clear to me. So it seemed to me that we were talking about two different worlds of peace and conflict. The world that was seen through the conceptual packaging of the global north, and another world that was seen by the subjects of conflict-affected societies. And both of these worlds were able to communicate, are able to communicate clearly. Of course, there are different types of blockages in those communications, but there is clear communication, but it's a dialogue of the deaf and it's not being heard. And there's a hierarchy in terms of how much is being heard. Anyway, over a very long course of time, this got me thinking about how peace looks in situ, in context, how peacemaking and its tools would therefore be framed in conflict-affected societies. What kinds of things would be done? And I don't want to pretend that when I refer to these alternative, contextual, local, agential rationalities of peacemaking, that everybody's involved. I mean, I think it's true to say that peace-oriented civil society is a small minority of civil society and social movements, and connect with smaller groups in society than rather mainstream political, economic, social, cultural, and historical dynamics. But one thing that's become clear to me is that in the international organizations, as well as in local peace debates, there are very common agendas, similar agendas. And those groups who are capable of elucidating these kind of epistemological framings of peace are either self-censoring or are not being heard in the wider debates. So it's a short step from that to talk about beginning to abandon Eurocentric, state-centric, elite-oriented, state-driven, security-oriented approaches to peacemaking, and try to see and to think through the connections with the very latest cutting-edge thinking on peace across now a very wide range of disciplines. It's become more and more interdisciplinary, as well as east-west, north-south, and the social civil movements on the ground that either are familiar with this knowledge because of its dissemination, or intuitively connect with it a priori. So this brings me to the first key point. I've done a lot of work recently on the formation of what I'm calling an international peace architecture, which is a kind of major system in world history and world politics, which has emerged and evolved over a long period of time, and has developed and has been consciously designed more recently to respond to the existential threats of war for societies as well as for international order and its different systems. And this architecture is not well known or well mapped or well understood, but it's a kind of hidden structure behind the international system, the donor system, the state system, the different tools we have for dealing with peace, from the formation of political order through to things like peacekeeping and these sorts of things. And as I understand it, this entire historical framing of peace architecture, which is now coming more fully into our view, we can see it with more advanced methodologies and interdisciplinary perspectives, and also more contextualized knowledge, which has emerged more recently. This has been led by the sorts of groups who do local peace building historically. They produce the ideas with contextual knowledge, they're empirically tested, they're culturally resonant, they have legitimacy in society after war. They're often picked up by political elites when they are desperate for some kind of solution to an unending war they've got themselves locked into through their own failed perspectives and limited peace tools. And then they're finally adopted and they become systemic. So from these small ideas and movements, you eventually get insertions, structural insertions into international and local political order. Now this, F.R. Hinsley wrote about something like this in the 1960s. He was beginning to understand this, and he said, there's a big gap between the production of local knowledge about peacemaking and its wider systemic adaptation or adoption at the international level. And he estimated the gap was about 300 years. And that all sounds a bit reductionist, of course, but the point that I'm trying to make is that if we take it that local peacemaking, its agency and its goals have filtered up to the state and to the international multilateral order and international law and so on, and been influential, mysteriously influential, because they are so weak, they don't have direct forms of power, although they often have social cultural forms of power. And that filters in and shapes the international order and its peacemaking tools, and every order needs peacemaking tools to maintain itself. Then to understand the future of peacemaking, we have to look at what local peace actors are doing now around the world. We have to hope that the future of peacemaking is not a future 300 years in the future, as Hinsley suggested, but that this process has been speeded up by new capacities, interdisciplinarity, new forms of communication and knowledge dissemination, new technologies, the growth of networks. In other words, an embryonic shift in international order from a world in which you made peace between states, according to hegemonic interests filtered through multilateralism, to a world in which local peace actors are able to shape and influence networks, mobility, dynamism, pluriversality, polygon, and so on. And a lot of this comes from those concepts that I've just mentioned, come from those local peace actors who are often situated in the global south, have experience of diversity and plurality, have long designed very small tools to mitigate and mediate conflicts in their own contexts, and so on. So there's some hope there, but the problem is that the peace system that we have that has emerged using this type of time-lapse methodology over the last centuries is reactive. It's always designed with the last form of war and conflict, the last innovations in violence in mind. It takes a very long time to be implemented at the structural level. And it's quite mysterious as to how the sorts of local knowledge that scholars around the world are now uncovering about peace makes it into the international system at all. But you can see that that's speeded up. So I'll give you an example. For example, the debates about local ownership and human security, people security, and so on in the UN system and in the donor system, which starts in the early 1990s, is really picked up from having an ear on the ground and increased contact with local social and civil movements, and inadvertently finds its way into some of the state donor institutions, JICA and DFID, and so on, and gets filtered into international doctrine and policy, and then becomes widely adopted. The problem is that what happens next is the wide doctrinal adoption of that type of knowledge is blocked at the implementation phase. So now we have a huge amount of very forward-looking, very critical doctrines, which would be quite comfortably put in front of local peace organizations, civil society actors and conflict-affected societies anywhere in the world, which are being written into international doctrine, in the UN system and international law, in donor practice, and so on. Sorry, not practice, in donor doctrine, but they're not being implemented. So there's something about this phase between the adoption at the elite level of this type of practice, this type of knowledge, and the unwillingness or the lack of political will and lack of resources to actually implement them. Anyway, I could talk about that dimension quite a lot, but let me go back to the local in the last few minutes of my talk. So I'm putting a lot of weight on the shoulders of what we can probably all identify as local peace actors who find themselves or raise themselves above the sectarian oppositions, the dichotomies of their local contexts, and begin to speak multilingually in a way that they can communicate with donors and internationals, but also are able to communicate across the divides in their own conflict societies. And the only way that happens is because many of these civil society organizations, and here I'm thinking of organizations like the National Peace Council in Sri Lanka, or the bicommunal intercommunal movement in Cyprus. These organizations come through, they often are standing on the shoulders of giants, but they also form themselves. And over time, through very wide-ranging contacts with either very small contextual groups attempting to bridge divides in politics in those situations, or more broadly at the regional and the international level, places where they're not at war, if you like, but they still have to bridge a lot of divides. And they're able to produce a form of dialogue, polygon, which makes sense in all of those levels. And that allows the development of a political discourse about peacemaking. And it has, I think, in many of these contexts, from Cambodia to Timor-Leste to Colombia, Sierra Leone, over the last 3 or 4 decades, developed in ways which quite closely mirror liberal thinking on human rights, on the welfare state, on democratization, the rule of law, and so on and so forth. And that's partly because I think these were seen by those groups and organizations as being the most advanced political technology that was available on the planet in epistemological terms. So I don't think they were saying by their adoption of liberal thinking about peace over the last decades, that this is the best approach. And actually they have done a huge amount of work in pointing out the inconsistencies of these Western peacemaking and peacekeeping and development models, pointing out their hypocrisies, their underfunded nature, the distance between the reality of practice on the ground and the policy making, the doctrine making in the centers of power in Brussels, London, New York, Geneva, and so on and so forth. The need to make it culturally and historically appropriate, the need to translate it into local languages. In other words, we're talking here about hybrid forms of peace. And some of the work that I was doing in the 2000s was about how we connect the emergence of hybridity in political order with local movements that were trying to adopt human rights, democracy-based developmental approaches to peacemaking, who were also thinking through their own cultural, historical, and ideological experiences. For example, so many of those conflicts that peacemaking tools were being designed for by the UN system and by the donor system over the last decades were designed to mop up the conflicts that fell out of decolonization, that were left over from the imperial and colonial period, and also the conflicts that emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union. So they had justice, ideological, power, cultural, historical, and developmental components. And of course, this is an incredible array of problems for any new country or conflict-affected society, divided society to face. So we're talking here about the minutiae, about the small networks of a nexus between peace scholarship and peace activism in conflict-affected societies, which were often also affected by imperialism, colonialism, and the collapse of the Soviet Union, as well as by the excesses of the West and its neoliberal turn after the end of the Cold War. So we should not overload these actors, either intellectually and conceptually or in practice. But isn't that what we went on to do? I mean, in the 1990s and 2000s, there were huge amounts of expectations that civil society could save not just conflict-affected states, but also the entire Western peacemaking model. At the same time as funding being withdrawn, doctrines being redesigned in ways which still favored historical stratified understandings of international order dominated by the West, and looking for the cheapest solution possible. Now, just a few weeks ago, I was giving a talk a bit like this in the UN in New York, and I had crossed swords a little bit with some of the participants who were from within the Secretariat, who are looking to accommodate, let's say, Russian, Chinese, and Indian approaches to peacekeeping and diplomacy and mediation in the UN system, and also to accommodate it within peace building as a practice. And my sort of retort was that this is shifting UN peace building so far away from the kinds of political claims we're hearing on the ground, which are for cultural, historical identity, for structural redressal of inequality, for historical and distributive justice, for sustainability, for attempts to bring in and understand better gender equality, for dealing with social deprivation across the different stratifications of society, for unpacking power. I mean, I gave a long list. And this was sort of dispatched as not being plausible within the peace building framework. So what that suggests to me is that we had a period where we have periods in this cycle between the production of knowledge about peace in local peacemaking organizations, which I can go into in more detail, but we don't have time. But I can direct you to an article I wrote which tried to do this. The adoption and this huge time lag between its adoption in the international architecture of peace, and then the blockage of implementation in that architecture, and then a shift away from the knowledge production in peacemaking, where we have this confluence, this network confluence between local actors and what they say on the ground, given their visceral knowledge of conflict, experience of conflict, and from the scholarship that's been developed across a range of disciplines in the now global academy about peace. And I think we're at one of those points. So for a while, this knowledge framework, civil society, social movements, and policy was kind of pulling together a little bit. The gap was closing, and now it's shooting apart again. And we're in a situation where it's become quite easy for peace builders, peacekeepers, diplomats, mediators, development specialists, and so on, to reject peace as a concept, in actual fact, which is exactly the opposite of what's happening on the ground in local peace movements. So I argued in some earlier work about peace formation, and this is just, I'll conclude here, but this is a concept which I developed to basically rebut the much more dominant concept of state formation. State formation argues that basically the kind of war notion of states, that states form themselves through war and violence and crime and extraction, and they become power sharing entities with some weak checks and balances, but really what they're all about is about power and extraction, and with a few strange exceptions like the welfare state, that's where they tend to go, and that's why you should never trust a state, because even when it seems to be your friend, it has the potential to become the Leviathan. So there's this argument about state formation as a long historical process, very Western-centric argument too about European state formation. And I wanted to mirror that and say, well, what happens and what can we see developing when local groups of actors come together to try to transcend their long-standing conflicts, which have been leading to bloodshed and material destruction, as well as the destruction of cultural and environmental infrastructure. What would happen to politics if these groups, and we can see examples of them in every conflict-affected society, and I think there are examples of that wider influence on the nature of international order building too. What would happen if they were forming politics? What kind of polity would emerge? And I would like to speculate that from that we would see one which did connect with many of the goals that have found themselves into the already dead letter, that is the UN's new Common Agenda for Peace, which is what I was discussing in New York a couple of weeks ago. The new agenda for peace that's being developed, which includes gender and sustainability and justice in its arrangement of peace and peacekeeping and mediation, diplomacy, development around the goals of the UN as a kind of outgrowth of the Charter and the work of the Secretariat and the agencies and these sorts of things. But it's a dead letter. So what we have is a confluence, again, between social movements and peace actors on the ground, the possibility of the production of doctrine at the international level, but non-implementation in practice, and indeed a kind of rejection in practice of its own doctrines by some of those who are operating within the system for political reasons, because they have to keep power on board. So herein lies the problem for peace formation. It has knowledge, it has networks, it has doctrine, it has mobility, it has some forms of social legitimacy and cultural and historical resonance. And it has a kind of ethical view of the survival of the biosphere at its heart, as other peace scholars have long pointed out, people like Galtung and a few others. So from these peace formation dynamics, we have to build on the already complex political, multilateral, and legal order that exists. And we can see that peace formation is pushing it to be less state-centric, much more networked, digital, highly mobile, to expand consideration of rights, and yet to increase local legitimacy and representation, to redistribute resources, to improve human security. I mean, there are a long list of things which we can decisively say are shared across peace formation actors around the world, and therefore would be formative of a new form of peace, a new set of peacemaking tools, and a new international order or orders. if that were to come to fruition, which it might do in 300 years' time, judging by previous practice. So what this sort of points to more broadly is that peace formation actors, despite surviving in the kind of informal shadows of their local contexts, are quite highly politicized, very well informed, intuitively or scientifically, are slowly able to influence things, are very networks, can be very mobile, work across generations, have a justice and sustainability perspective, are able to secure themselves to operate in both public and informal space without too much risk, can step outside, can transcend the limitations of conventional domestic and political order, have used the platform of the liberal peace recently to try to develop further from, but are increasingly finding it too constrained and too limiting, have tried to build hybrid systems, but have found the power relations that any peace actors and any peace movement is up against quite overwhelming. So there's a list of kind of suppositions and ideas and assertions there, which help us think about the next stage of this broader international peace architecture. If we can put these things together and think about the massive growth in practice of peace formation, the massive increase in their contribution, both contextually and internationally, to a more peaceful form of politics and better understanding of peaceful political order, then we can start to build that next layer of this historic international peace architecture. And I think that's the sort of project that I've been involved in recently. I've been looking at the blockages to their work, what blocks them. And, you know, clearly power relations are one thing because they are small, they're not formal, they're not well resourced, but they have access to knowledge, mobility, networks, they are transversal, they are often transnational. They can work against power relations, even though it seems unlikely. But they are also blocked. And one of the blockages is the international architecture, the formal state system that we have today, the multilateral system that we have today. These systems, the UN system, the development system, these systems are now archaic, if not moribund, and need radical revision. And I suggest that these groups are starting to sketch out, if we can put the evidence together, where the system may go next. So I finish on a positive note, noting that they are quite marginal to contemporary politics in a kind of everyday presentist sense at the international scale, but not at the local scale. But noting also that they have historically filtered up to the international scale, and that we are now able to sketch out what these local social peace movements around the world are saying, and to draw some broader understanding of how to revise the international architecture, how to improve peace tools, how to build a new layer of this architecture, how to stabilize the past layers, and how to deal with new forms of conflict that are emerging, which are touching on issues of also of networks, technology, sustainability, resource use, land use, many of the things that have been very close to their agendas throughout the modern period. So these peace formation strategies are formative of a new political order, both domestically and internationally. And we have to now look around the disciplines and their methodologies to work out better ways, as scholars such as Roger McGinty has been doing, to read these signs and these indications, so that as academics, we can perhaps sketch out new schematics for a more peaceful international and domestic order for the future, drawing on that kind of knowledge. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Oliver, for this really intriguing overview of your work. Let me ask something as a matter of clarification and also to kick off a discussion. So you were basically saying that local actors have the capabilities and the potential to actually translate their ideas into the political architecture, but we're kind of overloaded with expectations by the international community also in the 90s, and they kind of need the international peace architecture in order to support them. Then those ideas were translated into progressive doctrines at the international level. I guess you also mean, among others, sustaining peace, for example. But then the translation in terms of supporting the local actors from the international level was or is kind of blocked due to several reasons. And what would interest me now are those reasons. You kind of indicated that there might be a lack of political will. I always had the impression, because there's also some kind of discussion going on. So we have sustaining peace work, but we're doing business as usual. So where's the problem? So what would you think? I have the impression that often it might be the over-complex bureaucratic international structure, that kind of bureaucrats sitting in their offices and just doing day-to-day work, not asking where the instructions came, why they should do something, and it kind of the outcome is some kind of business as usual mission. So I guess my question would be, might it not be eventually a pragmatic problem that the international peace architecture does not support the local actors in a way that they would need it? Or is it actually a political problem? Or both?
Do you want to directly respond, or should we take more further questions? I cannot, sorry, I cannot hear.
I can directly respond to that while other people
perfect.
are thinking of questions, if you like. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting question. This issue of why it is blocked. I mean, I think it's fairly obvious when you start engaging with local peace actors around the world that they don't have just bureaucratic critiques. They're not even domestic political critiques. I mean, often these are ideological and structural critiques, and they're touching on questions of distributive and historical justice, environmental justice, gender questions. I mean, these are big political questions. So that suggests to me that peacemaking and its tools, as we've been experiencing it in our kind of past 30 or 40 years, is really designed to maintain the current order without changing it. So there's very little room for development, for structural change in the post-89 international system. Now, I think that's incredibly problematic for most scholars, by the way, across disciplines, because we can clearly see that this system is eating itself. But of course, for peace activists who have been at the sharp end, I mean, war is an outgrowth of the dysfunctionality of domestic and international politics, the inability to distribute resources, to respect different identity groups, to think across generations about broader questions of justice, and to provide a basic and decent living with integrity. And that sort of perspective, such as that last sentence, has become an anathema to many of those who are sitting in international institutions or are controlling foreign policy in their states or their development ministries, who are called upon, at least professionally, to see the structural hierarchy of states in international order as more or less eternal. There being a kind of race to the top, but in no way can there be any slippage. And for as long as we have those sorts of perspectives, we don't have sustainable politics. That's where the science goes. So if peacemaking tools are appended to that kind of hierarchical and extractive historical politics, then they can never do more really than dampen down the violence. Mike Pugh used to call it riot control. Now, the political agendas that we're getting from our local partners, sources, scholars, activists are much more wide-ranging than this. We still live in an international order in which our peacemaking tools are more or less designed to throw up cordons sanitaires around conflict and to isolate us from it. And that system, I think, keeps breaking down. I mean, we saw it notably with the kind of risks of what they were calling infection, with the Balkan Wars, and then with the war on terror. We saw it across sub-Saharan Africa again, with the kind of next forgotten world war that was been taking place, the Middle East, the failure of the wave of revolutions, and so on. I mean, these things aren't just internal failures. They're structural failures of international order. So blockages, we've been working on this, myself, Gazim Vizoka and Sandra Pagoda, and we've come to the conclusion that there are kind of tactical blockages in peace processes. And often these tactical blockages come from elite actors and regional hegemons, and they're designed to target the political claims that are being made by local groups for accommodation, for pluralism, and for various forms of justice, and to push them back. And the reason for that is because they offer a structural challenge to hegemony, both within the state and within the international system, in the regional system, in the political marketplace of conflict politics, if you like. So what we've had is we've seen how easy it is to spoil a peace process become a common lesson over the last 30 or 40 years. And we've seen, I think, that both the Western peacemakers, mediators, and UN peacekeepers, peace builders, and development specialists, as well as humanitarians, have become adept at adopting a discourse and a language which is designed to produce a stalemate in conflict-affected societies, not a peace outcome. Not a peace outcome that would be measurable and have integrity when compared to the scholarship that's been developing on peacemaking. So we've got the emergence through these blockages, these small tactical blockages, of stalemate forms of peacemaking and a stalemate international system which is breaking apart. The second part of our research suggests that stalemates tend to collapse. They may be long-term, but they never end up unfreeing themselves. They end up getting worse. Now, what this is suggesting then is that, for example, if you look at peacekeeping, peacekeepers, small forces designed to maintain some kind of status quo ceasefire situation, to provide a basis for civil society and for political elites to mediate outcomes, to create more pluralistic dialogue, this kind of thing. I mean, everything's very overloaded here. It's very, very easy to push back against peacekeepers without upsetting the peace process. So you can stop them operating as a platform for civil society to become more dynamic, for mediators to reach an agreement, for new security agreements to be reached in an extremely easy and cheap way. So this can easily become a systematic process. Blockages can become systematic, and when they become systematic, they then threaten to have regional and international dimensions. And I think that's exactly what we've seen with the failure of stalemate peacekeeping in Ukraine in 2014 and the outbreak of this major regional war since. There's nothing that any local actor or any local peace movement could have done about that process. And that's the limitation of local peacemaking, peace formation. It provides knowledge and legitimacy, networks, mobility, and so on, but it doesn't have the levers. It's unfeasible to ask local peacemakers to cut off the king's head. One, they wouldn't do that because they're mostly pacifists, and two, they don't have any power whatsoever. They only have this kind of discursive power, which connects them to the past and to the future of political order in their own context, and very slowly, more widely. So I think we can do a lot more work on that, but it's not a bureaucratic problem. It's a political problem. Because at the end of the day, they are often asking the question, how can we live sustainably with justice and respect on this planet? Whereas what's emerged from liberal peace building from the West, and also now from the other poles in international order, is the question, how can we dominate this planet? And that was a question we thought was put to rest with the failure of fascism. But it re-emerged with a kind of liberal hegemony during the Cold War, and that provided an excuse for other ideological poles, the resurgence of authoritarian and illiberal thinking, the reneging on the expanding rights claims that were being turned into doctrine through the treaty system of international order. I mean, things are going backwards extremely quickly. And that's why I'm suggesting that now is a time to read and scale up what local peace actors and local knowledge, contextual knowledge and comparative knowledge about peacemaking has produced. And let's not forget that here we are today. I mean, most of us, I guess, are from the global north or from institutions in the global north right at this present. And that can be problematic because it's, a kind of a metropolitan perspective of global history and so on. But we have never had so much data, and we've never had so many conceptual developments, and we've never been more broadly networked and widely networked across the planet instantaneously with access to that knowledge and data. So the potential peace movement, the potential peace epistemology that emerges out of this moment should be far better than anything that's gone before, because our methodological tools and our practical tools are far more substantial.
Thank you, Oliver, for answering the question in detail and also for your great keynote speech. Now I want to open up for a little bit the space for Q&A, because there are so many experts on the local level, but also there are so many academics, as far as I can see in the chat, on the field of peace and conflict studies. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions, and maybe someone wants to comment. Juliana.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your very interesting presentation or talk. I want to, or have a question regarding the note you ended with, that in order to sort of birth, thinking about other systems, alternatives to the hegemony, we should draw on the knowledge that has been created and that local peace actors hold. And sort of theorize alternatives out of it. And to me, on the one hand, this sounds a little bit like extractivist knowledge production. On the other hand, I'm wondering whether we as academics and whether academia in general, is the right place to do so, being embedded in neoliberal logics by ways of funding, also by ways of ideology.
Thank you. That's a very good question and perspective. Where would you propose it's done? I mean, so this is the problem, and I don't want to suggest that you're not on the right track, but I think we need a structural solution to the problems that you raise. So the one is that we have this kind of metropolitan extractive knowledge production, and the other is that the Western academy is now becoming so neoliberal that it's almost impossible to maintain an ethical research agenda in that context. And I think they're both absolutely spot on. However, other academies around the world that are emerging are in the same state. And as I mentioned several times in my little talk, social movements and peace actors in conflict affected societies are seriously overloaded and also much more insecure than they ever have been before. So while, for example, what we're doing here is not perfect, at least we're doing it. The very important methodological point is to remember that we don't have to think in terms of the binary logics of us studying them, but we can form networks and teams. And part of local peace formation thinking, as I imagined it, was that we would reconstitute the hegemony of epistemology away from the centralized authority figure that scholarship traditionally depended upon, and decentralize and disaggregate it back towards these kinds of discursive polylog groups that are able to, through experience as well as through knowledge, connect with and develop either reactive or more substantial responses to actual conflicts that they are experiencing. And I think we've gone quite a long way in that direction. I mean, if I was to say out of 10 steps, we've taken maybe 2. But I think before this generation, so my generation of scholarship emerged, we were still very much on step 0. And our generation was motivated by a desire to build much more global networks to think about peace, to revive the kind of post-1940s knowledge on peace, which was institutionalism, liberal international law, and regionalization, federation, mediation, peacekeeping, and to do better with those things. So I certainly accept your underlying thesis that this is far too limited now, but it's part of the architecture, and it's upon that the next phases, next layers need to be built. So I think we're not trying to do extractivist knowledge, but of course, every time we engage with one of the past generations or our own generations' methodologies or epistemologies or concepts, we realize that it has limitations. And it's the next step then to deal with that, your generation probably to deal with that. In terms of, is academia a place to do this? I appreciate your point that there is a risk that academia is a business, and we've lost sight of the ethical grounds of knowledge production. By the way, the Enlightenment basis for knowledge production, the rational application of scientific knowledge, and so on and so forth. And I think these things are definitely damaged. But academia, in my experience, is a place where you can talk to policymakers, go around the world, build networks. You can start to see that transversal, transnational, new international, new peace kind of shimmering into existence somewhere in the far horizon, because you're not necessarily quite as constrained by sectarian viewpoints in context, by the elite stratifications of your own society, by the state system and sovereign borders, by the distribution of resources. I mean, you're still constrained by those things, but not as constrained by them. I mean, I would suggest that we scholars need to fight for our autonomy and independence, and to keep universities on the right track and not do what we're told all the time, but say no and move on if your institution might accept it. Anyway, that's a divergence, but it's still the only place we can do this work. Now, if you were to try and do it in civil society, you would get the same complaints, plus you wouldn't have any resources, and you probably would have very little access. Because there's also a hierarchy, as we know, within the civil society peace movements and all the rest of it. Some of them are lucky and get funded by Norway or Sweden. Many of them, have to apply for bits of funding from the British Development Agency or from USAID or something, and don't, there are a lot of constraints on what they can do. If they tick the is this a business rollout idea box, they get the money. But there's no box which says, does this further sustainability and justice across society? So there's a lot that we as academics can do and can offer. It's only a talking shop, but we do build networks and links. And I think we are part of, or we could be part of, that historic formation of new political orders. Not necessarily because we're influential or because we're authority figures, not at all, but it's just that we are a part of the production of knowledge, not the only part. Universities form to disseminate knowledge and to produce new knowledge. Many of those neoliberal universities that you're talking about here disseminate knowledge but don't produce new knowledge. They disseminate ideological knowledge. Well, we can do something about that. Most of our students already realize that. So I wouldn't be so kind of hard on Western universities. And we are working hard on building links we have been working hard on building links across the world. And yeah, there's interesting things to be said about that. So, the conflicts of the faculties that Kant once imagined would be the way in which a university, a sovereign, territorialized university, would produce knowledge. So the faculties, being around the university and fighting a battle over the truth. And he imagined it in a very small space, a campus or a city. That's now become a global fight. And the global south is there. Non-Western actors are there. Different actors from different stratifications across the global system, including civil society actors, are part of that. This is a polylogue. And I think that's pretty important. We don't really understand where it's going to go and what it means. But I think we can point to some parameters emerging about our thinking about peacemaking from what's been going on, let's say, most substantially in the last 10 years. But thanks for that interesting and provocative point.
So I want to read a question in the chat. Laura Zister asked you, now I want to read it. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. I'm sorry if the question was already answered. I'm in Bolivia right now and problems with the internet connection, but I was wondering if the local is looked as a homogeneous entity, especially in the international arena of peace building. Right now, the discourse is more about including the local in peace building, but the question is which local actors and institutions are included or heard, because this selection is in itself political and sometimes undermines marginalization within civil society and the local level itself, because not all local peace actors have the resources to develop capacities to communicate on the local as well as on the international level. And yeah, so I want to pass this. I had a similar question for myself. I wondered if it's on clearly on just the epistemic level, the problem, or is it more on the power structure? Like Boaventura de Sousa Santos wrote about it, and he said it's an epistemicide. So, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a very long time ago, right at the beginning of these sorts of debates, I wrote an article which was called The Romanticisation of the Local. And, the idea of that article was to say that Western peacemakers, as it was back then, this was sort of before peace building had really become a kind of major policy concept, tended to see the local as a kind of homogenous space, which was to be persuaded, coerced, or cajoled into accepting that their scientific parameters of liberal peace, and also they tended to see it in a kind of stratified intellectual sense, that these were people who need to be educated into the new ways of political order. So there was a kind of multiple distance between those who were acting in the interests of diplomacy and mediation and peacekeeping and so on, and the redesigning the constitutional and economic reform of political systems. And their subjects. And I think we've moved a little bit away from that. I mean, even though we are Western and quite Eurocentric, and we do tend to still focus on things like rational actors and individualism or individualistic modes of knowledge. But I think we have somehow got over that sense, and there has been a sort of repoliticization of how we understand local politics, looking for the politics, looking for the kinds of issues that drive different ideological predispositions, and looking for the groups that try to bridge these with historical and contextual awareness as well as international awareness. And that is often the peace actors, the civil society peace actors in those societies. So we're trying to get that sort of thing into a broader perspective, that we're not talking about the wider society, but we're seeing that all of these groups, from local society to social movements to civil society to international peace actors within the international system, are in relational contexts, they are entangled. And it's not methodologically plausible to see them as separate. You know, they operate in waves. They have different levels of power. And that's what shapes politics. So breaking down those conceptual and methodological barriers and these silos helps us have a better understanding of the local political claims that are made, how they're made and who makes them, which are commensurate with the most ethically grounded knowledge on peacemaking in the wider international global academy that has emerged. All of that is a moving target. The global academy is expanding, new voices are adding new dimensions to our understanding of peace from different locales, contextual or regional, non-South, East, West, and all the rest of it. I mean, the study of peace has gained an enormous momentum over the last few decades when compared to, you know, for example, when I started, and there were just 3 or 4 concepts and a bit of history of the development of the European Union and peacekeeping and a bit of mediation and diplomacy, and that was it, you know. So we're in a much better methodological space now to understand this disaggregation, not to romanticize the local, to understand the politics and its dynamics, not to overload civil society, but to understand the claims that are being made and to be able to track how they shape and influence political international behavior if they do. So yes, I think this is agonistic. This is not about producing harmony. I mean, this is not peace as a beautiful paradise or, I don't know, the silence of the cemetery, but it's a peace which is based on discursive, dialogic, polylogic political contestation of the ability to live sustainably in justice on this planet. So the register's shifted from politics as being the contest over the distribution of material resources, the extractivist context. It's shifting into this more kind of, at least in the scientific, at the scientific level. So, well, I guess I can say more specifically about that. That means we need to look at those peace movements in local context and see what they're saying, and to compare them what Westerners are saying, or the Chinese are saying, or other donors, but also to compare them with what is being said at the political level about what kinds of political claims would settle the conflict and what sorts of tools are needed. And then everybody, I would suggest, from my experience of this, that the closest to the scholarship will be what these peace movements are saying, not what the political leaders are saying, not what the elites, the economic elites are saying, not what the regional hegemons are saying, for the most part. So that suggests to me that there is a possibility of this association or alliance or networks being built, which are formative of the future international system, future international peace architecture. So, you know, I think we have to be careful with the very negative epistemology of these local actors, because I find it hard to see where else we're going to go for knowledge about peace. If it's not going to be just the Western Academy, then who else is it going to be? And of course, the other caveat is it's very important to remember that powerful actors are far more powerful than the peace actors in this framing, have far more to lose from a peace agreement, will generally refuse to make concessions that affect them either personally or their constituencies. In other words, peacemaking is not just about finding a more harmonious but agonistic framing for local politics. It's also about finding ways of dismantling power, and particularly long-term historical, cultural, economic forms of power.
Thank you, Oliver. I see that, David, you have also a question, but unfortunately the time is running, and we have actually 3 more panels, and so I hope you all understand that at some point we need to stop the conversation. I mean, I could listen to you, Oliver, for days, but unfortunately time is running. So if everybody agrees, we can move on. I thank you once again, Oliver, for answering the questions in detail and for your great keynote speech. And yeah, now we can move on with the panel on South Sudan. We have Edmund Yakani from CEPO. And yeah, the moderation is the moderator is Eva Huber from the Austrian Center for Peace. So yeah, Eva, feel free to introduce Edmund Yakani to the audience. And yeah.
Yes, I work for the Austrian Center for Peace, and it's my great pleasure today to introduce to you Mr. Edmund Yakani, who is already with us, as I can see. Edmund Yakani, he is the executive director, as you have already mentioned, of CEPO, which stands for the Community Empowerment for Progress Organization, which is quite a prominent South Sudanese nonprofit civil society organization that is dedicated to a range of objectives, let's say. It is dedicated to the promotion of human rights, justice, but also to building peace, both at the grassroots and the national level. As we all know, South Sudan is quite a young country, but CEPO was actually founded in 1999, if I'm correct, in Khartoum, Sudan at that time. So it has been around and active and gaining a lot of experience and expertise for about 25 years now. So Edmund is really among the most prominent voices in South Sudan. If you follow the South Sudanese media regularly, you will hear his statements quite frequently, especially when it comes to defending and promoting human rights, democracy and justice in his country. And he particularly stands out also when it comes to the inclusion of civil society in peace negotiations. To my knowledge, he has been personally involved in national level peace talks in his country, which he may or may not be able to talk to us about today. He has also received, in 2017, he received the Civil Rights Defender of the Year award by a Swedish human rights organization. And I personally have had the opportunity to meet Edmund on a few occasions in Juba, in the context of a project we are co-implementing, complementing at the Austrian Center for Peace in South Sudan with funds from the Austrian Development Agency. And it has been the few times I've had the opportunity to meet him personally. It was very humbling and enlightening at the same time listening to Edmund, simply because of his vast experience and knowledge about peace work in his country and in the region. And also because of his capacity to explain the complexities of the conflict dynamics in his country to an outsider, such as myself. So let me now hand over to Edmund. He will probably tell you about CEPO's peace work and their peace building approach. Maybe also a bit about his vision regarding local peace formation, which is the topic of today. Edmund, you have about 20 minutes for your presentation. And after that, we will take a few questions from the participants, I understand. The floor is yours, Edmund.
Yes, am I clear?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm using my data, but I just want to show my face so that people know who I am. And then I'll put my video off while I go on with my session. Then I'll later come on my video during answers session. So thank you very much. And thanks for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Edmund Yakani. I work with CEPO as a community empowerment for progress organization. As you have introduced, we are much more anchored into peace building engagement as a civil society in South Sudan, looking at various conflicts. We have either communal violence over the use of land or communal violence over local boundaries. At the same time, also, we're engaged in resolving the recent breakout conflict in South Sudan in 2013. And one of the civil society delegates who sit on the mediation table directly and engaging with the parties under the facilitation of IGAT. So that is what CEPO is, and that is what we do. I'm trying to log into my computer. If you can excuse me, at least so that I can sound better. Actually, as I'm speaking to you, all of you, I'm just out of the parliament. I was in our national parliament on communal disputes. I was presenting. So I messed up with time, but it's good that I'm here. So yeah, this is me, Edmund Yakani. CEPO, part of our experience around local peace processes is that actually, if I'm to share with you information, I've engaged in resolving more than over 100 plus local disputes in South Sudan. And out of the 100 plus local disputes that we resolved in South Sudan, only 50 materialized and work better. And I have over 60 local disputes that I mediated as a direct facilitator. They didn't work. It couldn't really bring any results, simply because I come to realize is that some of these local disputes that are associated with resource management or resource competition or political leadership administration competition, it's not easy to resolve because the interpretation of this conflict vary from one party to another. So we couldn't really break through. But what I've learned is that in our work as a CEPO is that we are able to work with the communities, we're able to work with the conflicting parties in initiating conflict resolutions or peace processes that were able to create a relative stability. As my sister have introduced me, we have been working in one of the projects that were implemented together at the border of South Sudan with the Uganda. And we're using livelihood as an instrument of creating peace among conflicting communities. And I come to realize that in the school of mediation or peace building, I think the concept of now linking peace building to livelihood is really something that I realize it works. As I said, I've dealt with over 100 local community peace building processes, but I was able to succeed in over 50. Those 50 have linked with livelihood, where we use livelihood as an instrument of making sure that peace and stability prevail among conflicting communities, and it works. But in some of the disputes that we're trying to mitigate, where livelihood is not introduced as a tool of connecting conflicting communities, we find it very hard to break through or to secure peace and stability in those communities. That's one thing I'd like to say that in our experience that have shown us. But I feel also one thing that we have realized in our experience in working on peace building, it is the players, the actors, because the actors around the conflict keep shifting the goalpost from time to time. And one of the experiences I can share with you is that right now in South Sudan, we have parties who have signed the peace agreement called the Revitalized Peace Agreement we're implementing now. And we have other parties that have not signed the Revitalized Peace Agreement, and they're called holdout groups. So through engagement with the global Christian community, through Pope Francis and the other religious leaders, a process was initiated in Rome called Rome Peace Process for South Sudan parties that are not signatories to the Revitalized Peace Agreement. And this process was initiated after when our leaders were invited by Pope to Vatican for spiritual retreat. Now, if you see the Rome Peace Process, it's taking a long time compared to the time we have wasted in reaching a deal of the Revitalized Peace Agreement, which now we're implementing. Simply because in Rome Peace Process, the parties keep on shifting goalposts from time to time. And this tells me one thing in the science of peace mediation, that actually parties that sit at a mediation table, their interest is determined by the environment or by the surrounding around them. Some of them, they can come with an agenda. And this agenda, as long the peace process mediation continue prolonging, their agenda may become not of any great interest for them. They can shift to another agenda. And it's very clear proof by the Rome peace process that are going on. So as a civil society, part of our work is that peace building or peace mediation, it requires an academic approach. It's no longer a question of power sharing, responsibility sharing. It is deeper than responsibility sharing or power sharing or wealth sharing. It's a question that actually need to look into the element of humanity. What is happening when parties break into conflict? What are the triggers? Why are those triggers of this in this particular time? Because, like, if I can give an example why I'm raising this concern, previously in South Sudan, and I'm quite sure in Africa, climate change was not a factor that triggers violence among communities. But right now in South Sudan, we have climate change have triggered communal violence. So we're not talking about climate security. It's related to how do we mitigate implications of climate that may force human beings to really enter to a violence among or a conflicting war that they can fight among themselves. And that may lead to real issues of growth, human rights violation, humanitarian situation. So that's what we have learned as a CEPO in our work. And we feel that this concept of mediation, we need to look into it thoroughly. For example, like one of the things I can bring to your attention, I know some of you are really in the academia sector, the template of IGAT in terms of rules, or the template of IGAT in terms of mediation, it's no longer a relevant template, because the template is a template where you look at matters of power sharing, look at the matters of wealth sharing, look at matters of end game of peace agreement must be ending with elections. And this is a common template IGAT been using for quite long in the region here, in the region of IGAT. And it was a template that right now South Sudan is struggling whether they can resolve the ongoing crisis in Sudan that all of us were aware of what's happening to now. The format or the template for resolving the crisis in Sudan is no longer fitting into the template of IGAT, because the template of IGAT was tried through the BTN, which is less than 2 years. It was broken, and then right now, as we speak, Juba peace agreement is no longer relevant to the conflicting parties in Sudan. So I think we need to start thinking in the level of the academia, the template for resolving disputes or political dispute or armed conflict, because there are other factors that are affecting the templates that we have previously. The IGAT template, as I said, it doesn't work. So as a CEPO, as a civil society, I'd like to say we realize that actually, as civil society, being proactive in conflict resolution, in peace mediation process is very important, because we bring in the voices of the citizens, and we turn the outcome of any peace negotiation or any peace building becomes citizen driven, because once it is a political elite driven, another elite may emerge, and who will be in dispute of the current peace process that are going on. So as a CEPO, that's the lesson we have learned. And I think this is my presentation, and I'm ready to answer questions of whoever want to raise the questions. Just want to minimize time. And after this particular session, I'm going back to the parliament, because I'm doing a hearing in one of our communal violence at the border of South Sudan and Sudan. And now it can become complex, because we're resolving two communities bordering Sudan and South Sudan, Abyei and Twitch Dinka. And as we speak now, Sudanese refugees are coming to those particular communities, and violence are going on. So we're trying to find a way of how do we diffuse the local violence so that we can have Sudanese refugees living in an environment that is safe, because they're coming to an environment where it's not safe. There's a heavily deadly communal violence going on there. So thank you very much, but I feel it's a mixed up of a good thinking. The first session is really completely academia, and I've enriched my thinking. And I think the partnership of academia and civil society in conflict resolution or in peace building is very important, because the products of the academia research, we use it. What I'd like to say is that the context of conflict is keeping on changing, because some of the templates for resolving conflicts has become resistant to the parties in conflicts. Just like a medical doctor saying, look here, this particular disease have developed resistance to this particular medication. So we have certain types of conflict have developed resistance to certain templates of peace mediation. We need to start thinking, having a new approach. And I think the approach of getting livelihoods as a part and parcel of templates for conflict resolution is very important. Thank you very much. I want to waste much of my time for question and answer session, so that later we can exchange. I like it to be more interactive than listening and then closing the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edmund, for this very concise presentation, and I think your very clear messages, particularly last one on the templates not fitting anymore, will probably trigger a lot of conversation and discussion. There was one hand up that is down now. There's one hand up from Sabine Jaberg. Would you like to pose your question? You're muted if you're speaking. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I have no question.
Ah, okay, sorry. I saw the hand.
It was a different symbol.
Okay, then let me go through, see the hands up, or we look.
Andy has a question.
Sorry?
Andy has a question.
Oh, please go ahead, Andy.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Edmund, and thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I have a question referring your talk and peace building through livelihood. As you are aware, the Humanitarian Development and Peace Nexus has shared much more light on peace efforts in other sectors of the international aid community, specifically the humanitarian aid actors and development actors. And as I have worked several times in South Sudan in the area of Agok, Turale, with MSF, I was wondering if you could tell us, I'm a humanitarian aid worker by profession, what could we do to support you, the peace builders, the local peace actors better, out of the scope of a humanitarian aid organization or a development organization? What could we do and how to get in touch with you? Very practical questions as usual from our side. Thank you.
Edmund, do you want to respond to that directly?
Yes, I want to respond to his question. I think the nexus between humanitarian aid and the efforts for creating a durable solution is very important at the current moment, because you have this tendency where communities will break into conflict, or political elites will break into conflict. Then immediately the next call doesn't go for anything. The next call go, we need ceasefire. And why we need ceasefire? Because we need to have a humanitarian response. Now, if you talk of the nexus between humanitarian response and the search for prevention of the conflict in terms of peace mediation, I think it's very important that we need to coordinate humanitarian response with efforts for searching for durable peace. It's very important. And that's where the element of livelihood comes in, is that when humanitarian aid, and this is something that I'd like to bring before I could go deeper to my answer, and something that I'm researching on, when access to humanitarian aid become an instrument for any either of parties in conflict, using it as a weapon of war, that's where the problem becoming more complex, that everybody starts looking at humanitarian aid as a tool that they can use. Like, for example, let me give a practical example. What does this mean? For example, some people will create crisis or will create violence in order to find access to humanitarian aid. And once they have access to humanitarian aid, they'll keep on sustaining that violence so that at least they have a continuous, consistent humanitarian aid. Like, for example, I'll give an example in South Sudan. When our conflict broke out in 2013, we have, under the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, a bit of a responsibility to deliver protection of civilians. The peacekeeping mission have to create a protection of civilian sites. They call it POC, protection of civilian site, which is more or less like an internal IDP camp. So when these POCs were created as a huge humanitarian response to these POCs providing humanitarian aid, actually even people who are not affected with the violence start migrating to those camps because they become an instrument of accessing food or accessing humanitarian assistance. So for me, we have a very big role to play. We have humanitarian response to link up with the people who are trying to build efforts for searching peace. So for me, what we need is that the humanitarian aid should be used as an instrument of bringing the conflicting parties together. So the way how we design our humanitarian response should contribute in reducing divides among conflicting parties. For me, that's assistance we need as a local peace actors, that if we can use humanitarian aid as an instrument of bringing together conflicting parties for dialogue, that's where the nexus become very important. And it has worked in South Sudan. In some of communal violence where I was involved, some of you, if you are well past of South Sudan, we have a state called Jongole. Jongole is built out of a pastoralist communities that keep on raiding each other. So one thing I come to realize that when I was being used by the UN peacekeeping mission, by UNDP, to go and mediate their problems, what I decided to do is that when there's a humanitarian assistance, actually building the local mechanism for the humanitarian assistance or to help distribution of food. For example, they have chiefs, they have traditional leaders, whom they call it chiefs. They have to form committees that register the people and decide on how to coordinate with humanitarian access to distribute the food. Actually, I started using the humanitarian to bring chiefs of the conflicting communities or the traditional leaders of conflicting communities as they come together to agree on how they can create a conducive environment for distribution of humanitarian assistance. I started using that opportunity as a way of nurturing connections among them. So that is assistance. So the nexus between humanitarian assistance and the search for peace is very important in conflict situation. And then sometimes some of us who are in peace building sector or who are in governance sector, we tend to push humanitarian actors far away from peace negotiation. And I think that's a mistake. That's a big mistake. We need to start building a culture where if we are negotiating peace building or peace agreement that is a political instrument, we need to bring humanitarian players close. Because if that peace agreement breaks, we're going to go back to the humanitarian aid society. We say, come here, I respond. But why should they respond if they're not given a chance that also they can shape an agenda? So for me, that's an access. The assistance we need from you as a local peace builders is your humanitarian assistance. We should take it as an advantage of connecting conflicting communities, because they can disagree on shooting bullets, but then they will never disagree in receiving food. So if since they can agree in receiving food and they can disagree and stopping bullets, let's use the food as a tool of bringing them together and nurturing culture of peace and conflict prevention and protection of civilians among them. That's the assistance that we need. Yeah. Another part of the question, how can you access me practically? I can share my contacts, and our sister, if she have my details, you can take my details from her in terms of WhatsApp. But I'm in South Sudan engaging, and part of my work is right now, from tomorrow, I'll be much more working with South Sudanese government to establish what we call a crisis management group to humanitarian response towards the influx of Sudanese refugees, because I'm also worried that we have a historical problem with Sudanese community. If we don't prepare ourselves properly in diffusing some merging tensions, it may come something. But I think humanitarian aid actors have a big role to play in shaping an agenda of attaining a durable solution to political crisis or to a violent situation. That's my answer.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Edmund. Just one short additional question. Is there any NGO, humanitarian NGO, that you can name that has already reached out to you or to local peace actor in South Sudan? So a good example of an NGO who proactively contacted you, or people like you?
I would like to say a humanitarian NGO that have reached out to me in South Sudan, it's not there. UNOCHA have not reached to me, WLP have not reached to me.
Okay.
The only NGOs I deal with the UNDP reach out to me, UN Peacekeeping Mission reach out to me for conflict resolution. Like as I was telling you that right now I came from our parliament. We have a conflict at the border of South Sudan and Sudan between two communities of ABA called Ngok Dinka and Twitch Dinka. And I'm the mediator of that particular situation. And now we have started receiving influx of Sudanese refugees in that crisis. So one of the biggest challenges that I can share in South Sudan between humanitarian workers and peace builders or local peace builders is that we don't have any coordination mechanism. We find ourselves in the field. When conflict break out, we find ourselves in the field and everybody's struggling with his own agenda. You find humanitarian aids are more serious, looking into creating a conducive environment for distribution of humanitarian assistance. Because sometimes one of the things I've experienced in my life that as local peace actors, we create a non-sensitive environment for humanitarian workers. Why? Simply because we don't understand humanitarian principles. And because I've worked with quite humanitarian workers, I normally used to tell some of our local peace actors that we need to be conflict sensitive, because we don't want to create a room where we put our colleagues in the humanitarian sector into a risk, because sometimes food can act as a divider.
Yeah.
But if we're able to utilize food to act as a connector, is better. So it means we need to understand humanitarian principles as we're responding in search for durable solutions. So I think the nexus between humanitarian workers and people who are working around search for durable solutions for political crisis is very important. That particular nexus, that experience is very important in having a durable solution and long-lasting solutions. As I said, because my experience in Sudan is that sometimes violence is used as an access to livelihood. I have communities that go and raid and create a violence because they won't develop it to bring free food. And they create camps out of nothing, and they can go farm, they can cultivate, but if they go for a camp, they find immediately there's a response coming from humanitarian aid workers, and they become, and actually right now, yesterday I was in discussion about Sudanese refugees. Should we open, and I'm one of the person who is really sort of like pushing that we should not open a very concrete approach in receiving Sudanese refugees in South Sudan. Let's look at an integration system, because the world having so many crises. Ukraine crisis by itself is taking the attention of the world more than what's happening in Khartoum. So if we're receiving refugees of Sudan in South Sudan, one of my advocates that let us have an integration approach. Instead of keeping them in a camp to stay, wait for food, let's find a methodology where we bring them and we allocate them farms, we allocate them seeds, let them farm, let them go to the market, let them find a way. If some of them are people who are professionals, that they have skills like medical doctors, let's integrate them to our hospital. If they're teachers, let's integrate them to our schools. Let's open up. That will reduce the demand for humanitarian aid. And actually that will empower them, and that will improve them to have a self-owned livelihood. That this system of creating camps that people start
addicted to culture of dependency, and it creates another sector of confrontation in the society between the host community and the refugees, and that really prolonged violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Edmund, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks a lot for your insights.
Yes, thank you, Edmund and Andreas. I'm very happy to provide the contacts of Edmund and his organization. There are two more comments or questions in the chat. I'm going to read them. The first one is, thank you, Edmund, for your interesting talk. As you mentioned, climate change is as a growing trigger for conflicts. Do you have the feeling that the people who are affected most are heard, and that their expertise and experience on the local, for example, agricultural knowledge, is heard and included to find future-proof solutions, or are solutions mainly suggested by experts who are not based or living inside in South Sudan? And the second comment, thanks, Edmund. I agree with you that livelihoods are a good instrument for peace, but don't you think that the issue of identity and power remains sensitive, even if the actors have enough to eat? Would you like to react to that, Edmund, please?
Yeah, my reaction is that climate change is becoming real. And let me just give a bit of a set light on climate change, our experience in South Sudan, and specifically being a local peace actors that move around the communities. Much of my time, 80%, I'm with the communities. Yes, I've been seeing some few development in some states like Jongole, Upper Nile, where it's Unity, where it's flooded. And my experience is that the knowledge within our government in building a government climate change responsive budget is zero. Our government is not taking climate change as a real issue, that it affects humanity. So you find our budgets are much more, we'll then take into account things that may contribute in building a government capacity and capability in responding to climate change. We don't take that serious. But of course, of latest, the last 2 years, we have experienced flooding in some of the states. And that flooding have displaced quite a number of population. And this population have migrated to highlands, and in that highlands, land disputes start merging up. And being a land dispute, because it's a competition between farmers and pastoralists on the use of the land, actually it becomes a source where when the land dispute become more tense among the two communities or two players, which is pastoralists and farmers, we start seeing coming in of illegal armed traders. They start supplying arms to the hand of those communities in order to confront each other. So armed dealers start coming in, they find it as a fluid market. So you can see how much climate change have triggered things that happen. In terms of agriculture really is a big, for me, there's a few things that we need to take in terms of climate change environment like South Sudan, where it's really the soil is still fertile and the soil is not yet a spoiled soil. Investing on agriculture, investing on really building a culture of forestry, tree planting, and making sure that the environment take care of it. So many factors, if you talk of environmental response, is very important. But the local knowledge that we have in South Sudan, because lack of climate experts in country, and specifically the lack of climate experts in the government, various levels of the government, like national government, sub-national government, local government, lack of experts there, have made the response or has lowered the knowledge of communities in terms of taking climate change serious. We have climate local-based solutions. And I started witnessing them recently. In one of the communities, they're saying, look here, we have lost 2 years without farming, but we feel that previously, during our ancestors, this particular area have big trees. We have cut these trees for charcoal. And we feel the absence of these trees now have created for us flood. We need to go back and plant the trees because that helped us during our ancestors or our grandfather's time. These trees are here, we don't experience this. But now because these trees are no longer there, we cut them off for charcoal, we burn them for charcoal. Now the area is becoming flooding. So there are ideas of local solutions to climate. So the concept of us using agricultural solutions to climate change is very important. But I think also in terms of experts of climate change, we have not advocated enough. I think we're taking climate change mainly from the angle of climate security, climate solutions, political decisions. I think if we can speak to our national budgets, how can our national budgets really take into account climate response serious? Whether under every ministry, we have national budgets that our lawmakers usually use to pass every year. So how can we sanction those budgets to be climate responsive from various ministries, from various interventions, because once we link it to that particular process of the budget, then you have the political leaders have attention. They start listening. Right? For example, experience of what you call gender sensitive budget. It become a normal culture that government political leaders start buying in. So I think also we need to push the climate towards that angle. And the concept of agriculture, yes, I do agree. Issue of identity, yes. Issue of identity is also sensitive, as we can use livelihood. But you know, the question of identity in conflict resolution, in my engagement for over 20 years as a mediator, local mediator of peace process in South Sudan, or peace initiative in South Sudan, I realized that sometimes identity are used by political elites to sustain their political legitimacy. Sustain their political legitimacy in the sense that they want to deny other people's identity and they want to impose a particular identity. Identity is a very sensitive area. It's a very sensitive area that we should not ignore it whenever. And in my experience, when I'm doing my power analysis in any response to communal violence, or when I'm doing my actors analysis in response to any communal violence, I will never avoid to do analysis on identity clash. Because I want to see in these communities what are identity clash. For example, I've worked in some communities where they have one ethnic group. But in that particular ethnic group, the section of that particular ethnic group where their traditional leader comes from, they consider themselves as the pure section of that ethnic group. The others whom there's no chiefs coming from there, they consider them as like just they are sort of like they're not pure, they're not original part of that. So you come to realize this is one ethnic group. So part of weaknesses of experts in conflict resolution or in resolution of political tensions is that normally they tend to undermine issue of identity. And identity determines personality, determines humanity. So whenever you are resolving problems, you need to take identity issue serious. And I remember one time I was like a civil society delegate who sat with a GATT mediator who come from Djibouti. He's called Dr. Ismail Wise. He is a professor in conflict resolution and political science. So IGAD assigned him as a special envoy of IGAD to mediate the conflict in South Sudan. And even the current UN Secretary General Representative to AU, Hannah Tete, who is a former Minister of Ghana, Foreign Affairs Minister of Ghana, she's among the mediators. I was saying, look here, if you don't take identity in the template of IGAD, this agreement is going to fail. And really, when we're almost signing the agreement, identity is merged. So we no longer look at Salva Kiir as a president of the Republic of South Sudan. We don't look at Riek Machar as a leader of opposition. We start looking into where they're coming from, which ethnic group they belong to, which identity group they belong to. And that become a hardliner in finishing up the business. So identity is one of the, actually, if you're building any template, at the current moment, any template for conflict resolution or for searching peace, climate, identity should be part and parcel of that discussion. If we leave out of that template, because the movement of the tracks, the establishment of the political solution, the political crisis will have implication on climate factors, will have implication on identity. That's my response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edmund, Yakani. I'm sure there are so many more questions from the audience, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So this is the moment to thank you for your presentation once again very much. If there is any need after the presentation yes.
I seen hand up from one of our colleagues here. I think I saw his hand is who, Tete or Tete's Sai? I saw his hand has been raising up.
Okay, it might be, but I've been told by the organizers that we need to come to an end because we have already run over our time. But I'll be happy if there's still a question to connect the two of you and to send the question by email or any other support I can provide to make sure that
and you can share with the audience my details. Since you have my details, you can share my details with the audience in terms of WhatsApp number, email, and the rest, and they can follow.
All right, I will do that. Thank you very much, Edmund, Yakani, and all the best. And over to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks, Edmund, a lot. It was really fascinating. Well, now we like some minutes behind, like 18 minutes. I hope that's not a problem for the remaining speakers. At least I hope so. So I'll swiftly hand over to Amina and Amina to our panel on Bosnia. Amina, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Max, very much, and thank you also, Edmund, and all presenters before. I have already seen that Amina joined us, I hope you can see and hear us also.
Yes, I hope you can
Okay.
see and hear me as well. Yes.
Yes, great, thank you. I have a great pleasure today to introduce Amina Krvavac. She is Executive Director of the War Childhood Museum in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. She holds BA in International Relations from the International University of Sarajevo and MA in Children's Rights from the University of Geneva. She has been a member of board of directors of the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience Europe. This is a network of museums, historic sites, and memory initiatives connecting past struggles to today's movements for human rights. And before I give a word to Amina, I just want to say really a few sentences, few minutes to provide some context on Bosnia and importance of War Childhood Museum in this country. As you probably know, the Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks, that means Bosnian Muslims politicians in Bosnia and Herzegovina, continue to spread their ethnocentric and nationalist propaganda in their so-called dominion. And central to this is the assertion that one own ethnic group is a victim and the permanent threat posed by the others. And discourse primarily serves to maintain a power. One only remembers what also promise political added value, emphasis on political added value. Even about the wars, crimes that took place in Bosnia during the 90s, as example, Srebrenica in 1995 or Prijedor 1992, there is no consensus in society on it, neither about the causes, not about, nor about the cause of the crime or the victims. And the victims are reduced to their ethnicity and bare numbers. Although in everyday life, and I think this is really important to emphasize here, contact in Bosnia between the ethnic groups take place without any problems, but talks about the war are generally still very, very unwelcome. And at least there are 3 versions of the war in Bosnia. And now I'm coming to the Museum of War Childhood in Sarajevo, where Amina is director. The museum shows us how mutually exclusively memories can peacefully coexist. Because all objects, documents, photographs, letters, but also audio and video recordings in the museum tell of children who grew up during the war. The museum collects and brings together all voices, regardless of geographic region, ethnic or religious background, and so on. In the museum, the dominant ethnic perspective on the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina is exchanged for another collective perspective, that of children at war. The clear rejection of ethnic access opens a platform on which every visitor can deal with the past on a personal level. In this museum, it becomes clear that ethnic categories don't determine human behavior. Many truths about the wartime past can be found in the exhibition. It shows that memories can be based not only on one's own past, but also on that of others. By sharing many lived experiences, a better understanding of the complexity of war events can arise. Detachment from the myths and understanding and empathy create a space for coexisting truths. Amina Krvavac believes in museums as space for social action and drivers of change. And she is particularly interested in unlocking the potential of museums in transitional justice processes. She is committed to creating exhibitions and workshops that support open and conscious dialogue, and to promoting the idea of museums as a platform for societal healing and reconciliation. And I think this is really important in every post-conflict society and as well in Bosnia. And this is the reason I'm really happy that you are, Amina, today with us and with your presentation titled Transforming War Childhood Experiences into Building Blocks for Peace. And I would say floor is yours now, and please, welcome.
Thank you, Arina, for such an extensive introduction. And of course, thank you for this opportunity to share more about the work of the War Childhood Museum. And also, I think for today's discussion, it's important to talk about this, how the idea was born, so about its inception, vision, role in a society. You touched upon some of the concepts that I will also return to during the presentation. But since we are talking about the museum here, and we think that visual aspect is really important, would you mind if I share a couple of images with you just to illustrate while I'm talking? Because it's disabled.
I'm sure that's okay. Or
yeah.
Max.
But somebody has to enable the screen sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Can you see it well?
Yes.
Great. I will look at the case of the War Childhood Museum and argue that local peace-building initiatives and platform for sharing and exchange of war childhood experiences or war experiences in general can be a tool, an effective tool for dealing with a difficult past, for starting a dialogue, and for contributing to this broader idea of realizing, I know it's very controversial if we talk about transitional justice goal as a broader term. So this is what you can see is the logo of War Childhood Museum. I think it's very telling that children replaced a balloon with a bomb. And so the War Childhood Museum was born out of community of once war children in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it was born with an idea to contribute to better understanding of war childhood as a social complex phenomena, as multi-layered social phenomena that is often, in our view, oversimplified and reduced to trauma and suffering, and then as such heavily used or abused by political elites that you kind of mentioned a bit, Armina, because we operate here in a very complex post-conflict setting where we have parallel historical narratives, and anything which can be used is misused and abused by political elites to score points and to remain in power. So the museum opened its doors in, this is the building, in January 2017, after 2 years long grassroots campaign. It all started back in 2010, when our colleague, founder of the museum, Jasminko Halilov, decided to do something meaningful with his own childhood experience of living through the siege of Sarajevo. And so the idea was that he wanted to share his own experience with this view of doing something meaningful with it, but not just to focus on his own personal experience, but actually to include different perspectives, to somehow create a mosaic of short childhood wartime recollections of other ones, war children, to show all the complexity of this experience. Even if we all were, not all, but most of us in the team were war children here, most of us have very different experiences and different perspectives and different views on it. So I think in one of the previous presentations, there was this issue of homogeneous local actors raised, and definitely a group of war-affected children in Bosnia and anywhere else is a very homogeneous community, but still has this strong connecting common point, if I may call it that way. And so while collecting and editing this wartime recollections, Jasminko realized that there is this urge or need that many of the people who shared their very short wartime recollections with him wanted to share more, and that there wasn't an adequate platform that would provide for such an opportunity. And this is how the idea for the museum was born. I joined Jasminko and another colleague at this very initial stage where this was still an idea, and we together developed it further, and with help of local community actors of other young professionals that survived siege of Sarajevo and war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and all of us now being at this stage of where we are relatively young, still professionals of different disciplines, we all could together contribute to developing methodology to create collection of the future War Childhood Museum. So at this very initial stage, we had no support, we had no physical space, no financial space. It was just this idea, vision, enthusiasm to create a museum. And as you can see here, our meetings and focus groups were organized in bars and in malls and in parks. And so just to illustrate a bit this idea how everything came to life, let's say. So soon after developing methodology, we have started documenting personal stories of individuals who recognized the importance and who felt this urge to share more about their stories. They recognized the importance of this initiative. And before even having the physical venue for the museum, we managed to collect over 2,000 personal objects and record over 150 hours of oral history testimonies. And today, the museum's entirely crowdsourced collection consists of over 5,000 personal objects. And as you can see from this study, so objects in our collection are very, very different. So this is something also just to illustrate a bit. So these are everyday life objects. It can be toys or a notebook, letter, photography, some of the things that you, Armina, mentioned earlier. So what is important to say that our work, just after 1 year of operating in this local context here, we have decided to expand our activities abroad in a way that we would transfer our know-how to children in other war-affected areas, especially those where children are now children and going through this, with an idea to provide us opportunity to amplify voices of war-affected children today. So today in our collection, we have objects, personal stories, documented experiences of war-affected children from 15 war-affected areas worldwide. And so these are some of the objects in the collection. For example, these ballet shoes are from a girl from Sarajevo who dreamt of becoming a prima ballerina even in a city under the siege, and she wasn't, let's say, deterred from this idea, and she was going to practice ballet every day under sniper fire and shelling. And so stories like this speak about one aspect which in our view is neglected in dominant narratives about war-affected children, because they speak also about resilience and strength of children to create or let's say learn about the coping mechanisms even in these difficult circumstances. And when we present these stories in our permanent exhibition or our pop-up or traveling exhibitions, we really try to present these with a lot of integrity, with a lot of dignity, and every exhibition is carefully curated with help of war trauma specialists and also psychologists. So we want to show all of these stories, but in a very responsible and safe way for everybody who visits the exhibition. So similarly to this process of contributing to the War Childhood Museum collection is also much more than mere donation of an object or a personal story to the museum, but it's also very complex and carefully designed, multidisciplinary approach to create this methodology that allows people to share their stories, to, in a way, through feedback, we learned that many people feel that this is finally a place where they can leave burden they were carrying for years. and let's say share and exchange these difficult experiences, face with their difficult past at the individual level, sometimes even on a more collective level, and that this is contributing to their healing as individuals, which inevitably is reflected on society at large in a later stage. So this just a second. So what our permanent exhibition, it really shows that war-affected childhood, as I said, as very complex and multi-layered phenomena, it really consists of so many different aspects. And if we reduce it to trauma and sufferings only, we, in a way, take away the agency of war-affected children as active actors in a society. And so we really like to see and perceive ourselves, who were part of this initiative, here, but anywhere else, were affected children in general, as resilient and capable and some actors, but also even as empowered survivors, because most of us managed to develop some coping mechanisms and we are in a way pillars of this society now, and we need to find way to cope with whatever we went through as children and use this in a positive, meaningful way to help create better society. So with all this being said, whether we talk about advancing to this transitional justice through this platform that we have created that allows people to face their own or collective past, whether we talk about advancement of transitional justice goals and in broader terms. So the strength of the War Childhood Museum is really this focus on human, personal, and more precisely children perspective. So we are tackling very difficult topic, but from perspective of children. And in line with this, we really try to engage as many different actors in a society that are somehow related to this topic. So we try to offer different activities or opportunities for different communities within the society, such as, for example, our most recent collaboration was with women who survived conflict-related sexual violence as minors or young women and children born out of these violent crimes. So we co-created entirely an exhibition dedicated to their experiences exclusively. And through this series of actions and workshops and programs around this collaboration, we really received a strong feedback from both of these communities that this was really empowering and healing for all of them that took part in the process of co-creation. And even more importantly, so this is just to illustrate one of the body maps that was produced with women survivors during one of the workshops on co-creation of our Speaking Out exhibition. We were really, really proud and felt rewarded that our exhibition then became a tool for both children born of war and women survivors in their own advocacy campaigns with relevant authorities to fight for something which they haven't received for the past 30 years. So their needs and rights are inadequately addressed for all these years. It's really hard to accept this fact that we failed them so badly, and as a society, I mean, and this is where we hope to at least provide any kind of contribution that can help them achieve what they are trying to do. But I mean, this is just to illustrate what kind of actions we can do with platforms and initiatives like this. I think I would conclude here with this just overall reflection that local grassroots peace building initiatives can play a significant role in let's say, instigating positive, transformative changes in a society. And when I say this, of course, I am not claiming or daring to say that we are super powerful and that we have like all the how to say, the strength to completely reshape the society. So we are very realistic and thinking in terms that we definitely can and should contribute, and by acting jointly with other institutions and stakeholders, such as, I don't know, state institutions, we cannot have any concrete positive changes without actors that let's say are decision makers. So yes, we and other similar peace building initiatives can and should do our best to contribute, but of course also recognize what is and what can be our role in the process. And I will stop sharing the screen now. Thank you. So of course I would be happy to take on any questions, comments.
Thank you, Amina, very much. And I would say it's the best to open the floor immediately for a question because we are running out of time. So please, I will try to see all of you. You just can raise a hand or
I have a question.
Just, yes, please.
Yeah, thanks for this really interesting presentation. You have quite an impressive institution with the museum that you built. My question would be in building up your museum, your initiative, how do you feel was the support from national actors or the international actors, from knowing just a few, having just a few insights into a Bosnian peace process or the state of peace in Bosnia? The international community is so strongly supporting many initiatives. Was it maybe more than the state, or what was your experience?
Thank you for this question. It's actually an important point to raise when we talk about War Childhood Museum. So as from day one, we decided to be a platform, and we were very vocal about this. We are open for children from all parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and this means from all ethnic groups that were party to the conflict. And this was not well received by any level of government. And this was not in line with this entrenched parallel historical narratives, because we were supposed to, let's say, take sides, if I may simplify this. And so our hypothesis only is that we never received any support in those first years from anyone nationally because of this very deliberate decision to be there, like to try to provide suitable starting point for dialogue for everybody, because it's really if we cannot agree and accept that children who tell us about their everyday life experiences in wartime really went through this, it's then hard to think of a more suitable basis, let's say, for starting dialogues. So we managed to create the museum, and we managed to operate in the first years of our work, thanks to international donors. So private foundations from Europe were crucial for our, let's say, kickoff, because otherwise we wouldn't be having even the space or staff or anything. And so not only we didn't receive any financial support locally, but we were even told that there is no space that can be rented to us. This was quite a strong message, I would say. So we had to have this public social media campaign asking people, asking local community to support us, to have a space that would be rented to us. I think I addressed your question more or less.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? There are so many participants. I'm not able to see everyone at the moment, but if you have questions, you just can start to speak.
All right. Then
yes,
I'll
please.
just exactly do that. Thank you, Amina. And thank you for this presentation. I just want to take off of Max's question. So I don't know if you could be here in the beginning when Oliver was speaking, but he was basically raising the point that local peace activists in their work are pushing sort of us generally, globally, towards a more just peace. But the international peace architecture is just not able to adapt to that and to integrate this, and this is a political question. And now building on or off this experience of not being supported nationally in any way, shape or form, and now after the museum being or having run for like 5 or 6 years now, if I got this correctly, would you say that there is any chance that by you being present and you offering a sort of a space for this kind of dialogue, any of this is sort of seeping into the political sphere that then like political actors, say Bosnia-Herzegovina, could on the international level actually politically agree to sort of changing a system of how we do peace in order to integrate the bodily experience of materiality, of memory being thought differently, all these things. So it's basically a bit of an unfair question, obviously, also to the more general view that Oliver brought up. But I was just thinking, you offered a very bleak sort of, okay, yeah, there's literally just no connection to the state level. And now I was thinking, is like, is there any chance that any of this might seep into this, that we can actually get to this more hopeful perspective that Oliver was sort of projecting in the beginning?
Thank you for your questions. So first thing that I wanted to say, maybe just to correct myself from being so bleak. Initially, in the first years of operation, we had no support. And then after 1 year of operating, we got the Council of Europe Museum Prize, which is one of the most prestigious prizes in the European museum sector. So we were recognized at this highest level of the sector that we actually know what we are doing. So this, I think, really helped a bit that local stakeholders, I mean, decision makers, politicians, we have, I don't know, 12 ministries of culture and health and education. And, you know, it's a very cumbersome political administrative system. And some of them started paying more attention to what we do, to what we say. And some of them, for example, cantonal level Ministry of Culture started giving, it's just 3% of our annual budget, but still we are recognized as, you know, existing and operating initiative. And when I was saying earlier, we initiatives like us, I mean, museum institutions can and should contribute to this complex higher level debates and reflections. But I mean, I cannot be delusional and say, yes, we changed everything. Yes, we will challenge and do. And I mean, we are giving our best. And just this fact that now when there is, I don't know, electoral campaign here, some politicians would come to the museum to take their photos. They ask us for a meeting and say, okay, we went to the museum because we support peace initiatives. And then also many international actors and agencies that work on peace building are always using us as a, let's say, successful model. So all of this somehow is helping us to navigate, I would say, rather successfully this very, very challenging post-conflict setting. So I don't have very clear-cut answer and say yes or no, as you didn't even expect it. But yeah, I hope I managed to give you a much
It was more
picture.
of a proof to Oliver's point than I'd actually expected in the beginning. So like, thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I would like to ask our organizer, do we have time for one more question, or are we already too late?
If you have one more question, it's fine.
Okay, that means also the last question, short question, if you have or comment, please just speak up. Okay, if not, I would like to thank Amina again. I think it is a great idea and achievement that you have in Sarajevo. I mean, this perspective is just one of many that lets the past appear in a new light, but it's somehow inspiring, or could be inspiring for the others. And I would also say to everyone, if you go to Sarajevo, don't miss to visit this great museum. So thank you, Amina, for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I would hand out now back to Max. Thanks.
Thank you, Amina, and thank you, Amina, for this really interesting, presenting us the case of Bosnia with this example of the Peace Museum, the War Childhood Museum. So thanks a lot. So now let's come to our final case, which is Lebanon. Vera is already here, maybe also twice. I think.
Yes, twice.
Okay,
Great.
Thanks. Fantastic. So let's come to Lebanon. So let me just say a few words in order to introduce the situation of Lebanon. So Lebanon is, like Bosnia, in an official state of peace, but where also, like in Bosnia, the word peace has an almost cynical notion. That is also due to the Taif Agreement, which brought an end to a very long and brutal civil war among the country's sects. And it ended with a constitutional arrangement that prevented the worst, but it also prevented from any kind of possibility to improve the situation. So it nevertheless has functioned quite well, as there was wealth increased due to massive capital influx from Saudi Arabia and other countries from the Arabian Peninsula. But due to latest, the rise of Hezbollah, etc., well, this money faded away, and problems became the problems grew, and it became more and more obvious what was also true before, that the government is simply dysfunctional. But at one point, at least 5 or 10 years ago, it had to become active and functional in order to solve existential problems. So the discontent grew and grew, and it kind of manifested itself in a substantial civil society movement that took to the streets for months and is still kind of active, even managed to translate into political parties and became part of which became part of government, but we are kind of in the same situation more and more. But nevertheless, Lebanon has a vibrant civil society scene, also not like Bosnia, also massively supported by the international community, but with a huge national backbone. Also, there is one example of this. So let me introduce Vera at first. So Vera Mauler is the president and co-founder of the NGO Piece of Art. She will also speak about it and about its work. So she's also the MENA regional coordinator for the United Network of Young Peace Builders and the Lebanon country coordinator with the Human Security Collective. Regarding her expertise, she is a musician and a trainer with experience in working with children, youth, and community actors from many different backgrounds. And she's been the coordinator and project manager for multiple community-based and youth, peace, and arts projects within her NGO Piece of Art. And in this function, she's been part of numerous conferences on the international stage. So she has also a lot of experience in working together with the international sphere. So without further ado, Vera, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to apologize for the context, for the background. Unfortunately, in many cases, so I had to just get out with things from again. So please excuse my background. I hope you can hear me. So internet is an issue, so I had to get outside to get some connection. So I'm truly sorry for the background.
Oh, it's fine. It's working now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So I just wanted to first thank you for this session. So just an introduction about our organization. I was hoping it's possible
Vera,
to share.
maybe we should turn the video off to make it a little bit better for one. Sorry.
Yeah, no, on the contrary. I don't know if it's better now.
Yeah, I think so.
Perfect. So if it's not working, I can try to change the presentation again. I'm so sorry for this. So just to give you an idea about support. So support is an organization that started in 2016, founded by I'm a founder of the organization. The idea started in an area called VIPR. VIPR is actually an area that's in the border of Syria. It's highlighted as that's by local embassies, by embassies in Lebanon. In an area that's facing deep divisions between believers and social sites.
I'm sorry, the sound is still really bad. Is there a possibility to change something?
Perfect. I'm so sorry about this technicality.
No problem. We know that it's also a political issue fixing the telecommunication and internet network in Lebanon.
Absolutely, absolutely, and this is something we're trying to work on. But thank you so much for the opportunity. So the idea of piece of art started in an area that's unfortunately suffering from deep divisions, and well, these deep divisions are actually historic, as you kindly shared, also Maximilian, concerning the sectarian and the civil war that started even in the 70s. So piece of art started as a space for youth to come, regardless of their backgrounds, regardless of their religion, their nationality, because we're also working with Lebanese and Syrian youth. And I was hoping to share with you a short presentation, but unfortunately the internet is not helping, so I can share.
Maybe we shall try.
If that would be possible, that would be amazing.
You just try. Okay.
Perfect. So there's a video I just shared in the chat, which is our annual recap of 2022, which shows some of the work we have been doing. I don't know if it's possible to share it with everyone here.
Joseph, can you help maybe?
Sure. Give me 1 second.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. So this is just a recap of some of the activities we have been implementing in 2022. The idea was, the idea we came up with Piece of Art was to use arts as a tool to support youth with a space where they can find themselves, where they can feel comfortable expressing themselves, and at the same time, they can build their capacities, they can meet, interact, and get to know each other's opinions, views, and start dialogue from there. So we started with one of our first projects was Arts Against Discrimination, which was a project targeting or working with 100 young girls and boys who met, who learned different types of arts, including music. We have this local traditional instrument, which is called the oud. Most of you know it. And filmmaking, photography, as well as social media content creation, and all of that in parallel with civic awareness sessions and discussions focused on peace building, conflict resolution, understanding diversity, and etc. Trying to find common spaces and starting dialogue from there. So this was one of our first projects. We had recent projects more focused on also providing youth with the tools to be able to create their own advocacy messages and platforms. So this includes the Young Media Creators Program. So this program worked with also 16 young participants who were trained on software and hardware that they could use, they could access easily from their daily lives. And usually what we try to work on is software and equipment that mostly software that is free of charge and that youth can easily download and learn and teach others as well through peer training. So at the end of this project, youth were working on their own advocacy campaigns, and they created their own short films, their own photography exhibitions. One of the projects they worked on was a photo voice focused on an area called Fakihah, where Piece of Art is located right now. And the photo voice showcases the background of this area, the also cultural identity of the people living in this area. So this is something they try to work on. And one of the videos or short films that was created by the youth ended up was shared all over the nation, and including with one of the local Lebanese actors, without anyone being in contact with those actors or so those stakeholders. So it was something that was shared kind of naturally. So this was another project. We have recently also implemented a project that was called Misawed, a partnership program with PAX for Peace. And the idea of this project was focused on interreligious dialogue, starting roundtables between young participants. So we started first with training programs with young people focused on presentation, communication skills, body language, storytelling, so technical skills they could use in order to be able to voice their messages. And we also worked on their argument and counter-argument formation skills and debate. And then we launched debate sessions between youth who were part of the program and other youth who were from the community. After that, we had roundtables between the youth, and then roundtables with religious leaders who were all from different religious sects and backgrounds. And this was happening for the first time in this area. It was never the case where there was a space where they came together, and especially with the youth. So just to give you also a clear idea about north of Papp, where we're working right now, which is the internal valley of Lebanon on the border with Syria, as I mentioned before at the beginning of this session. The idea of this area is that it's kind of create in the form of small islands with virtual borders between these islands. So each village is a representation of a specific sect or confession or religious background, and there's not any kind of interaction or communication between these villages, because each village is kind of in its own bubble, in its own environment, in its own atmosphere. And this has been a divided area since the days of the Civil War and the confessional division. So the idea was to try to create the bridges with the youth. So starting the communication among the youth, and then youth would spread it. And of course, this is something that takes a lot more time, a lot more efforts in order to fix. But on the smaller scale, we were able to work with the youth, start bonding among the youth, and start creating these kinds of bridges among the youth on the smaller scale. So this is just an idea about the area. What's really interesting is seeing youth, because this is a very isolated area and very far away from the main cities and main populated and really areas that include more services, more spaces, and more cultural and civic spaces, let's say. This area is actually suffering from lack of these services, and including education, on the education level, on the level, of the sports level. So the only places usually the youth are able to meet is either in schools or recess times, or nothing. So the idea was, this is how support actually started, because it started with youth who are from this area who found that as a need. And right now we're trying to work on expanding this idea of this space. And in light of the current crisis in Lebanon with the electricity, because electricity has become, unfortunately, another privilege as digital access, we try to provide the space with solar panels, electricity, and internet, in order for youth to be able to use the space, to come to the space, to have access to online materials and resources, including online courses for the universities, for the schools, and for job opportunities as well. And just in general, for them to meet, to come, to interact with other youth, and start talking. So this is the main idea. So this co-working space was launched in 2022, and right now we're expanding that, and we're now working on a space also that provides youth with a sports court, sports equipment, in order to for them to be able to also use that as a tool for them to meet, to interact, and also to just play sports in general, because it's also something we like in the area. Another thing we are providing within this space is access to equipment. So this includes audio and visual equipment, cameras, anything related to filmmaking, photography, and music production, as well as musical instruments. And we're also trying to launch a library, which is a book library mostly led and designed by the youth themselves. And trying to expand on that. So basically to have a space that can have all interests, and at the same time everyone can use for their personal development and for the collective development as well. So basically these are some of our projects that we have been implementing. I want to mention that Piece of Art is a member of UNY, the United Network of Young Peace Builders as well. And we're trying to amplify the voices of the youth from the ground, from this area, and help them break the isolation of the area, break the stereotypes that are built on the area, because this is something that the area of North Africa is facing, which is the stereotype around these people being violent, drug dealers, which is actually not the case for all people residing in this area. It's actually just a case of a few gangs that do not represent even 1 or 2% of the population, of the actual population. So trying to give youth the space, the platform to showcase that no, this is not what the area is about. We are here, we have our own voices, and we are capable more than this picture you're putting us, or the frame you're putting us in. Youth have been creating short films, photo exhibitions, drawing exhibitions, theater performances, also digital artworks that are focused on showcasing their own concerns as youth in this area, and just in general. So we have been publishing these works on our social media, on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and other platforms we're trying to showcase in order to give more voice. Our social media is apparently also very active. We have more than 10,000 followers on our social media, and this includes mostly Lebanese and also international audience. We also have a program where we are hosting volunteers, and we have volunteers who are coming to this part from all over the world, including from the UK, from the US, from Ireland, from Scotland, Germany, so from Japan, from so many areas. The idea is to kind of create the space for the youth to learn from the experiences of the volunteers, and for the volunteers also to learn about the identity and the views of the youth, and be able to break this very barrier of the area, even on the international kind of sphere. Yeah, so these are basically some of our projects. We have also implemented several programs, artistic programs that are focused on youth expressing themselves publicly. So we have been drawing murals all over the areas in Lebanon, and right now, at this moment, there's a mural being drawn by the youth in Tripoli, which is a very far away area from the area we're working in, and which was designed by the youth of north of Graz. So we're trying to also share their views with other youth who are from faraway and remote areas in Lebanon, to kind of create this even symbolic bridge, and hopefully we will be able to also have more exchange activities with other areas around the world. So just to be mindful also of the time, I'm not sure if I'm over maybe going over my supposed time.
So, not yet over, it's fine.
Thank you so much, I appreciate it. So just maybe one small idea, we're also working right now on the podcast as part of the program. We're trying to break this isolation of the area. The podcast will be completely youth-led and youth-powered, and it will be hosting youth and stakeholders from around the area in order to share the experiences and help amplify the voices on the ground. So this is basically just some of our activities. There are some activities I haven't mentioned, but we'd be happy to also answer any questions or share any more details.
Thank you, Vera. It's really impressive to hear how many projects you've going on, given the circumstances, which are really tough, with almost no electricity, which is of course also of great relevance for internet. And given also the podcast project might also need a lot of infrastructural support. So it's good to hear that you can manage to run your all of those projects.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It has been also possible with over the time we have been able to build some kind of trust with the local authorities, with the local partners, and with the international partners as well. So in light of the current crisis, this wouldn't have been possible without that. So we're definitely hoping to be able to sustain that kind of momentum.
Yeah. So any kind of questions, please raise the hand or just speak up. So I would use the time and ask a question myself. So I have experience with NGOs that do analog projects as you do, meaning empowerment projects, which are focused on simple day-to-day activities, but with the end of empowering people politically, making them political actors. Also having to do with the international community being really helpful for local initiatives, but with the state level either not really caring or worse, trying to prevent those initiatives, which makes it possible for those initiatives that are focused on music or art to be able to run. So my question would be, have you experienced in some kind of projects when you try to be more political, any kind of restrictions or trying to tame you?
Well, the whole idea of peace of art, we're trying to kind of avoid political intervention, because this is the basis of the conflict where it's starting in the area specifically where we're working. So whenever you take that side, you would lose the trust, you would lose the participation and the inclusion of the people you want to include. Because unfortunately, politics is a very complex situation in Lebanon. At the same time, it's a very sensitive point for several areas and backgrounds. So we're trying to avoid that. We're definitely focused on maybe more the skills that would be provided for the youth to be able to express themselves, but not directly as politics. So we haven't had that type of challenge because of that. We're basically working on creating this space that's neutral, that's safe, where everyone can express themselves, and respect each other, but not be taking any type of or creating any type of programs that might feel like or create this kind of discussion where people would start taking sides. So this is kind of the approach we're taking. We have implemented recently a project that was called Meet Your Candidate. This is kind of more to the political side, but it's not actually political. This was during the latest the parliamentary elections in Lebanon. So we invited all candidates to come to the space and meet with the youth. So it was a discussion with the youth where they would discuss their programs, their priorities, what are their priorities, and what they are going to do when they become MPs or if they become MPs. And youth would share their concerns, their priorities, and it was kind of a youth accountability discussion to put the candidates in kind of an accountable position towards the priorities and concerns of the youth for this area. So this project was basically like 6 months ago, if I'm not mistaken. Apologies for the bad memory, but it was a kind of discussion between the political candidates and the young participants. Basically, this was one. Another project we implemented was basically more research-based, also where we did research with young participants. It included surveys, included focus groups, discussions, and one-on-one interviews to see what you think about freedom of expression and freedom of information in the area under the Heras Now project. And we created a booklet, which is also available on our website and our social media. I can share the link here. And it was also shared later on with local stakeholders and local activists and people who have influence in the area, in the community, to also show what you think about what the perspectives of the youth are, and to help think about how to create a more meaningful engagement of the youth on the local and community levels. So this was part of the research. I'm sharing with my website. So this is the website, and sorry, I'll try to send it as a link throughout the session. But I hope I answered you well.
And if I don't see other questions, yeah, I think we'll conclude here. And thanks again, Vera, for managing to be with us and for managing your internet connection. It did work out. Thank you. Thanks also to all the other presenters, the panelists, and also to the participants. There are still 21 here, which is a lot for an online discussion without breaks. So thanks to all of you, and see you maybe next time when we'll do it again.
Yeah, I also want to thank everybody for participating and for the comments, for the questions, and for the debate. And yeah, for those who joined later or missed some parts of the conference, you can watch it on the YouTube channel of the Varna Peace Institute. So yeah, thank you once again, and have a pleasant day or night, wherever you are.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye.
Danke, tschüss, baba.
Bye.